Hey, Sub2ers, my name is William Tingle of Sub2Deals.com. I would like to welcome you to this episode of the Sub2 Deals Show, where we talk about all things subject to. Now, occasionally, we will cover other topics, but it's always something to help you with your real estate investing business. Now, today is another episode in our Real Expert series, where we feature real experts in one or more aspects of real estate investing or topics that impact real estate investors. They share their expertise in the things that are critical to your success as an investor. Now, my guest today is Doc Compton. Doc's area of expertise is robocalls and the do not call list and all things concerning that. Doc comes to us from the McKinney, Dallas area in Texas. And he's been actively involved in this field for several years, credit repair, that sort of thing, credit repair specialist. He's been doing that for over 25 years. I actually met Doc I was recommended to his group and his kit that he has to stop robocalls. If you guys are like me, you get a ton of those things. You absolutely hate them. And we started having a conversation about investors. Now, he runs a pretty tight ship over there in his Facebook group. And he said, I can't let you in. I suspect you do robocalls. So we agreed to do a show here where he could talk about it. And as a way for me to prove I was worthy of his group. So here we are today. And I'll tell you, I'm glad to have you here, Doc. I've talked to a lot of investors. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know exactly what you're talking about. But we wanted to talk a little bit today about what you can do, what you can't do, what's right and wrong. So welcome to the show, and please, help us out.
Man, I'm so pleased to be here and hopefully contribute something of value to your viewers, to your groups. I'm a consumer credit expert, but in about probably 2007, 2008, I had my own radio show and television show, and my career kind of took a lean toward consumer advocacy. I was always finding myself in a position of kind of fighting for the little guy. And I went to work for a law firm to run the consumer credit section of that law firm. And it was my job to go after the debt collectors who weren't playing by the rules, by the credit bureaus when they didn't play by the rules, or if they somehow ran afoul of the law. And one of the things that we kind of got wrapped up in was what's called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which is a statute passed in 1991 that was designed originally to prevent those fax spam that people were getting. And I'm actually old enough to remember those fax machines, actual paper fax machines that you had to buy paper and ink for. And people started complaining because they kept getting solicitations, very ironically, for some of the same things that we're now getting calls for. It was travel or health insurance, cruises, some of that kind of stuff. And people complained. Congress did what Congress does. They made a law, said you can't do that anymore. In that law, they put a few lines in there about cellular technology and how it would be illegal for people to call your cell phone without your express prior consent. Back in 1991, when this was passed, obviously, things were different than they are now. You paid $1 a minute for every single call you got. Even if it was a telemarketer that you didn't want to talk to, you were being billed every time they called. And so they put that in there kind of as a protection as well. Now, obviously, fast forward to where we are now, technology being what it is, technology has kind of caught up and the whole robocall thing started. Debt collectors were using these robocall devices, these automated telephone dialing systems. That's what they're called. And they were calling people to collect debts. And as a part of the law firm, obviously we have a lot of credit challenged people and so on. And they were getting 10 calls a day from debt collectors with these automated systems. So my job was essentially to contact the collection agency and say, hey, you've called our client 10 times. There's substantial statutory penalties, which we'll come back to. We'll talk about those amounts in a little bit. But in some cases, it would be $20,000 or $30,000. Why don't you go ahead and subtract the $50 you say our client owes, cut us a check for the difference. And of course, now you've got their attention and the calls immediately stop and we work something out and so on. So the statute, Telephone Consumer Protection Act, specifically says that if you don't have express prior consent to call somebody, on their cell phone, the statutory penalty is $500 per violation. Okay. There are multiple provisions within the statute. So you can actually get hit for 2 violations per call, and that's $1,000 if you can demonstrate that the call was made willfully. And there's a number of ways you can do that. The easiest is you didn't scrub your call list against the do not call registry. And if you don't do that, and it's a willful call, then the amount is tripled. So it's now $3,000 per call, or $1,500 per violation. And obviously, these companies that are making these calls, regardless of the industry, are making a lot of calls every day.
Right.
So the statutory penalties can get pretty substantial in a relatively short amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it sounds like it'd be pretty pricey to be making these calls. Let me ask you this, Doc. Most of my familiarity with investors that do this sort of thing is typically, and I'm not going to say in every case, okay, wholesalers don't come after me, but it's generally wholesalers. They I mean, they're looking for houses that are pennies on the dollar, so they've really got to cast a wide net to try to reel a few of those deals in. So, and I've heard of these guys, they target area codes or certain zip codes, they pull a list, they fire all this stuff off, make a little recording. Tell me what you're finding with this stuff and how they're breaking the law, and how could they accomplish the same thing without breaking the law, if there's a way?
Well, you mentioned some of it. Probably the 2 biggest ways that I see this happening is foreclosure lists, where those become public. For example, here in Texas, where I'm at, when those someone's house goes into foreclosure, that becomes a public record, so that the house can be auctioned or whatever. When a lot of these wholesalers will get that list monthly, they'll have it delivered to their inbox every single month, and then they'll just take the name, the address, do a quick Google search, and very often find the numbers. Unfortunately, a lot of the numbers that they're calling aren't good numbers, and they're calling someone who doesn't even own that house or isn't associated with that house in any way. That's one end of it. The other end of it is a lot of times when real estate listings expire, or a house gets taken off the market without having been sold. A lot of times realtors, flippers, wholesalers, they'll call and say, hey, look, I know exactly why your house didn't sell, and I'd love to offer you an opportunity. If you're distressed and you'd like to get out from underneath this property, I'd love the opportunity to help you with that. And again, they do the Google search. Sometimes they'll subscribe to services that will do data scrubbing, and they'll get phone numbers and so on. And then they just call. And many times they're doing this with an automated system. They'll type in the numbers, put it into some sort of spreadsheet that then goes into this automated telephone dialing system, and it'll either send out text messages, which are also actionable, or the calls. And sometimes they'll do what's called a ringless voicemail, or voicemail drop. I've heard it called as well.
Right.
That basically just sends a voicemail that your phone never even rings. And it says, hey, I'm interested in your property at 1234 Main Street, and so on. That's one end of it. The other end of it is they just hand dial the calls. And the violations are different because there's another statute in play, commonly called the telemarketing sales rule. That's the one that was established in 2003, and it's most known for the fact that it created the Do Not Call Registry, the National Do Not Call Registry. The National Do Not Call Registry, for those who aren't familiar, I'm pretty sure everybody is at this point, but for those who aren't, it doesn't expire. If you think you're on it, there's a solid chance you are. All you need to do is go to donotcall.gov, and you can verify that your name and number are actually on that list. And that should eliminate a lot of the calls. Now, the problem is a lot of people don't check the list anyway. They don't care. And that's where they run into problems. And the very first time that I did this, just as a private citizen, and the history of this was, I semi-retired from the law firm in 2016, did some other projects, did some radio and television stuff on the consumer credit side, and wrote a book, when I got to about 2018, the summer of 2018, my phone was ringing off the hook. 20 calls a day. And it was for all the same things that all of your viewers are getting. It was the health insurance calls. It was auto warranty. Everybody, that's the one everybody sees the memes on social media about. Roofers, solar panels, tax relief, student loan forgiveness, startup funding. That's another big one, particularly if you use your phone sometimes for business stuff. And all of these are huge targets for us. Well, I eventually took my letter that I was using when I was at the law firm, scrapped all of the legal, the letterhead off of it, just sent it as though I was a consumer. And on my very first one, believe it or not, it was someone who wanted to buy my house. And they called me and I tracked them down. And when I tracked them down, it come to find out it was actually owned by a huge, the corporation was owned by members of a huge law firm, one of the big telephone or television ad personal injury lawyers, who I happen to know their name. And I told them, hey, look, you know that this is illegal. So what do you say we settle this and you not get embarrassed in court? And they said, okay, have a check for $2,000 and you come pick it up tomorrow morning at 10. And I said, I'll be there at 9:58. And we picked it up. A week later, I got 4 calls in the same day from an auto warranty company. I did a little research, found the owner of that company, called him on his personal cell phone number and said, hey, my name is, this is what I do, and here's how this is about to go down. And less than 4 or 5 days later, I had a $3,000 check in my hand. So I was like, okay, I'm onto something. You know, this is a real deal. Well, I went out on social media. I have a substantial social media following and said, hey, you know, if you're getting these calls and you'd like for them to stop, reach out. Put together a beta group of about 50 people, shared tips, tools, techniques. Everybody was sharing information and so on. I developed the kit, which I now sell on my website. It went viral in March of 2019. And this has been, it's taken over my life pretty much ever since.
Right.
So I've dealt with a lot of what would be some of your audience.
Right.
Those wholesalers. I've seen them all. I've heard all the stories. I've heard all the arguments. I'm very familiar with all the case law that's out there all over the country that says some things are and some things aren't legal. The key is your listeners, your viewers that got to know the law, and they can very quickly find themselves in a world of hurt financially if they call the wrong person, perhaps somebody that's purchased my kit online, because we're busting those guys daily.
Okay. So back to, like I said, as far as this, as it relates to real estate investing, you've got people that so if an investor pulls expired listings and contacts them by any means other than just a direct phone, can they make a direct phone call to the person that says, hey, I saw your house was on the market, but now it's not. Is it still for sale? Is that cool or is it not?
If their number is on the do not call registry, it isn't. And the violations are exactly the same. It's $1,500. It can be $1,500 per violation. Now, if their number is not on the do not call registry, you are 100% able to call them.
Okay. So let's take this back this way. See, you've got a seller on Zillow, you got a seller on Craigslist or any of the dozens of other FSBO websites that publish their phone number, says, I have a house for sale. I want to sell it. Here's my number. Call me or text me. How about that?
If they put their number out there, that would be an implied consent that would be really hard to get around in court.
Right.
If, put it this way, if they're having to do a Google search to get a number, that's the line that can't be crossed. Okay. That's what I would say.
If they're having to use a skip trace service or anything, if they have to use any kind of service to find a means to contact, that's a problem.
Correct. Okay. Correct. And you know, the postcards, the mailers, and I know there's a huge niche industry of just those guys that send the postcards and the handwritten letters and so on and so forth. Those are 100% okay. Yeah. And, you know, depending on who you talk to, those work better sometimes.
Mhm.
People these days, because we are all so inundated with these calls,
Right.
people don't answer unknown numbers. They
Mhm.
don't, they see a restricted number or an unknown
Right.
number, even if it's local to them, even if it's one of the Google voice numbers or whatever that,
Mhm.
it looks like it's coming from the same area code and so on.
Right.
People just don't answer them anymore.
Right.
So it's not going to be as effective.
Okay.
And the further we go down the robocalls trail,
Mhm.
I think the less effective it's going to become anyway.
Mhm. Okay, well, let's take this one step further. Now, personally, the list that you're talking about, I understand. Foreclosures, we've always mailed. I'm not going to call somebody in foreclosure. That's best done face to face or by a card. They can reach out if they want to talk. They're stressed, stuff's going on. But let me give you an instance here. If I target sellers that are on Zillow, and I'm either going to call their number because they've put it out there, they've raised their hand, they said, hey, call me if you want to buy my house. So I'm going to call them or I'm going to send them a text, but I'm going to send that text right from my phone that says, hey, I saw your house. I'd love to talk to you about it. When's a good time to call? They call me or they give me a time. We make conversation. We decide not to do business together. I say, hey, I understand we can't work together today. Do you mind if I follow up with you periodically? And they say, sure, no problem. And then I put them into a CRM, like let's say I use REI Black Book. You're familiar with that. It
Yes.
does a combination of things. It does text, it does RVMs, it does mailings periodically. Is that okay at that point once they've said, okay, check in with me from time to time?
It is, with a little bit of a caveat, and I would encourage anybody who uses, whether it's that one or any of the other CRMs or
Right.
follow-up mechanisms, there's probably pretty strict language in there about opt-in.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the way of saying they've given you permission.
Right.
Now, in the original statute, it said prior express consent.
Hmm.
Now, back then, it wasn't as specific as it is now. They changed the rules. Now it is prior express written consent. And
Oh.
written consent can be under e-sign and some of those statutes. It can be a digital, so they can click a button and opt in.
Hmm.
It cannot be a form that has a radio button that is automatically checked.
Right.
They would, to where they would have to uncheck it. It has to blank. They would then have to check it, and it has to have clear, unambiguous language
Hmm.
saying that they are giving permission for you to contact them via automated telephone dialing system
Right.
with SMS text messages or calls about whatever at the number they've given.
Hmm.
In that scenario, that is a valid opt-in.
Hmm.
Now, another question that comes up along that same vein is if they've, let's say you've actually purchased a home from someone in the past,
Hmm.
there's what they call an existing business relationship.
Right.
And that actually goes back 18 months. And it's 18 months, not since communication, 18 months since the actual financial transaction date. So, for example, if you bought a house 17 or bought a house from 17 months and 30 days, you can still call them one more day. But when it goes beyond that, now you're in violation. If you do it in a month after, you're covered by existing business relationship. I would
Right.
still encourage everyone to get that valid written opt-in before they call or text, particularly with an automated dialing system. Because, like I said, the problem with automation, as convenient as it is, as efficient as it is, it can also be extraordinarily costly if you're not careful. And here's why. Let's say, for example, I've got a wholesaler that calls me. Let's say they've texted me 3 times.
Hmm.
Well, they don't have my consent. I'm on the do not call registry. They're already into me for $9,000 about the 3 texts that I know.
Right.
Well, when I go to court, which I may do, I may go into discovery and say, I want to see your call history from all of your CRM platforms for the last 4 years, which is what I'm entitled to under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. That's how long the statute of limitations is. So I may find 5 other calls that or text messages that you've made to me, in which case now you're into me for another 15 grand. And that's kind of the dark side or the downside of the automation. if you're not playing by the rules with the automation, it can get very costly very quickly.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. It sounds like there are a lot of rules.
There's a lot, and the thing is, consumers didn't know about this.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that made it such a beautiful thing for me. Obviously,
Right.
I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a businessman. I make no
Sure.
bones about that. I don't make money when people make money. I don't get any of that. They keep all of that. I sell the kit online for $47, and I make no apologies for that.
Right.
What I found was that so few people, they probably kind of knew that they weren't supposed to be getting these calls, but they didn't know that they could actually go after people.
Mhm.
Well, just my media coverage alone, which has been coast to coast for the last 2.5 years, and as recent as Black Friday, people know about it now.
Mhm.
And people are seeking opportunities to go out. And just by virtue of the virality of my product and all the news coverage, if someone goes in and says illegal robocalls, there's a solid chance they're going to come on my website.
Right.
And if they do, well, there's a lot more people that know about it now. And by the same token, there's a lot more people who might have been in violation who simply did not know.
Mhm.
The wholesalers and the flippers and so on. And I talk to companies all the time who say, I had no idea. I was contacted by this company who told me they were going to give me warm transfers over the phone, or they were going to set appointments for me. I get this a lot with roofers and with solar panels and air duct cleaning. We had no idea. We just hired this company. We paid them $3,000, and they were going to get us 100 appointments to go out and try to sell our service, whatever it is.
Right.
And they didn't realize that it was illegal. The thing about that's interesting is that not only is the company who called liable also or texted, it's also the company that they were calling or texting on behalf of. So you say, well, it wasn't me that called, it was a marketing company.
Right.
Well, guess what? You're in it just as bad as they are through vicarious liability.
That was my next question is how do these and I know a bunch of these guys personally. Like I said, it's just never been something that I really pursued. I've got lists that I target and then they're Zillow or Craigslist. I mean, it's the stuff that when somebody raises their hand and say, I got a house for sale, that's the person I want to talk to. If it's foreclosures, we're going to mail to them or actually knock on their door and talk to them. But my question is, how does a cold call company even legally exist then?
There is a way, as I said before, with the opt-in that people can be called.
Right.
Or if they're not on the do not call registry, they can call. And it's one of those things that, if it's an automated telephone dialing system, they're not supposed to call, period. But there's what they call a safe harbor provision in the law that says if you call one time, that's not necessarily actionable.
Okay.
But if you call twice in any 12-month period, then that's where it gets problematic. So there is a very small safe space. A lot of times people go online and they'll fill out a form requesting information about health insurance, for example.
Right.
Well, they don't read the fine print. We all just click the terms and conditions button. Yes, I've read it, and no one does. And then they realize, like the next day, their phone blows up because that splash page, that form, all it is designed to collect leads. And then those leads are sold to insurance agents across the country who are just going to hammer your phone from now until eternity to sell you health insurance.
Okay.
And the same thing happens with, if you want to sell your home, there's guys that have got, and we all have contact us forms, and we all have that inbound communication as a communication mechanism. But you have to be careful. If you have that kind of a thing and you're going to put them on a CRM that auto dials them, you better have very clear, unambiguous language in there talking about the fact that they're going to be contacted via text, via automated telephone dialer, or you can end up in trouble.
The Sub2 Deals Show with your host, Sub2 expert William Tingle. We'll be right back. Have you ever had a seller give you a house? It's a pretty awesome experience. If a seller wanted to give you a house today, would you know what needed to be done to make the deal happen? Would you like to learn how? The Ultimate Sub2 Guidebook We'll show you exactly what you need to get those deeds and sell those houses with seller financing. Join the thousands of other investors across the country who learned how to get the deed with the Ultimate Sub-2 Guidebook. Get the Ultimate Sub-2 Guidebook today at sub2deals.com. Back to the show, the Sub-2 Deals Show, with your host, Sub-2 expert William Tingle.
So I just want to get some clarity on something you said. You said something about a safe harbor, that if you make one contact through this mechanical means, whether it's a mass text or RVM or whatever, one contact, that's it. They can either opt out, or if they don't respond, you never contact them again. That's acceptable?
It is acceptable. I'll tell you where the peril in that lies.
Right.
If, for example, you've called me one time,
Mm-hmm.
I can send you a demand letter and said, you've called me and it's against the law. And it's $3,000 in statutory penalties. And I want a copy of your do not call policy, which, oh, by the way, you have to have one of those. If you're using an automated telephone dialing system, you have to have a written do not call policy that is produced on demand anytime somebody asks for it.
Right.
And if you say, yeah, well, it's one call, I haven't called you since, and so on. In theory, if I still sue you, well, how much is it going to cost to hire a lawyer?
Oh, yeah.
To go to court, to do all that kind of stuff? Is it smarter to settle for $1,500?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer in many instances is yes.
Right.
I don't encourage people to do that. I've told them, the kit specifically speaks to that point, but it does happen. And people are amazingly willing to cough up the $1,500. And I'll tell you, part of the reason for that is the Federal Trade Commission and the FCC, they monitor case law and they monitor Telephone Consumer Protection Act violations. And if they find someone that's been sued 6 times in the span of 12 months for that thing, well, they're going to start asking questions. And before you know it, you're going to have a letter from the FCC or worse, the Department of Justice, saying, hey, we'd like to talk to you about how you're calling people. And at that point, now you're really talking about some serious expense. So it's best to stay under the radar and not, just not run the risk. Mm-hmm. It's just not worth it. I mean, if you think, you make $30,000 on a house, that's great. What if you just happen to call an area code where there are 10,000 of my kits in circulation, and all of a sudden you've made 1,000 calls in one day, and 6 or 10 of those people send you a demand letter within a week.
Right.
Well, now you've got a real pickle, and you're going to have to flip or sell a whole bunch of homes,
right,
before you're going to cover that cost.
Right. So what's your recommendation for a real estate investor to do? How do they target leads? Is it all by mail? Is that really the only safe way to go?
Mail is always safest.
Mm-hmm.
Email is okay. The problem with emails, there's restrictions on email too.
Right.
That's less of an area of expertise for me,
right,
but it's efficient. It's not as impactful, and there's a whole art to writing impactful emails to get opens and so on and so forth.
Right.
But you don't want to end up in people's spam folders, because if you do, well, then whoever's doing your mass email campaign for you, whether it's MailChimp or one of those mass companies like that, they'll shut you down. Because you're sending a bunch of garbage out. Right. If you are hand dialing calls, you've probably should be checking the do not call registry. Mm-hmm. That's a great way to do it. Mm-hmm. It can be expensive to get the entire do not call registry every single month. It's about $18,000 a month, something like that. I was told. I don't know the exact numbers, so don't quote me on that. But you can get it by area code. You can get it by whatever. But if you're calling, let's say you're calling just all the phone numbers on my street, well, there's probably a dozen area codes on my street. Mm-hmm. People that relocated here, or people that maybe grew up in Dallas, so they have a 214 number. Right. But there's also 972 and 469 and 817 and all these different things. So it gets very expensive. Mm-hmm. The other thing, and I'm not a huge proponent of these lists, but there are TCPA litigator lists that are available. And these are people who you absolutely don't want to target, because they're people like me who do not call or not. They've actually filed lawsuits or gone after people for TCPA violations.
Right.
Those are really there's not a lot of safety, especially if you're using an automated dialer system of any kind, unless you have the opt-in. Encourage people to visit a website, fill out the form, and we'll send you free, no obligation information.
Right.
If they opt in, you're covered, period, as long as your language is good.
Right. So if I'm an investor, and I know I keep going back to this, but most of the people that watch this are investors,
Sure.
so they're curious. If I'm an investor and I want to do, say, one-off text to people that have raised their hand, let's say that I go into Zillow, I go into Craigslist, these people have posted their numbers, they want people to contact them about buying their house, and I use a scraping service to scrape, pull the list, and use a texting service to send them a one-time text. Hey, I saw your house. I'm interested in buying it. Is it still available? And this service that I use says they scrub the do not call list. Okay. They're not going to send this out if these people are on do not call. Is that safe?
It is safer. It is not completely impenetrable as a defense. And here's why. There was case law from, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, and it was the auto warranty industry. And basically what they were doing is they were hiring a marketing company that was making the calls. Now, the auto warranty company's marketing company wasn't scrubbing the list. They were just making the calls with random sequential dialers, period. Right? Somebody answered, they would go into the script. If they hung up, they hung up. You just move on to the next number. The consumer goes after the auto warranty company and says, you owe me whatever it was, $20,000. They defended that. The auto warranty company defended that success. Well, they lost originally in the original case. They lost and were ordered to pay. They appealed. And on appeal, they came up with the argument that, wait a minute, we didn't call it. We weren't in cahoots enough with the marketing company to know that this was their business practice. So, that we can't be held liable. And they actually won that appeal, and the thing was overturned. That case law was used for quite a while. And then judges kind of got wise to this because the auto warranty companies and the roofers and all these other companies were having these nudge, nudge, wink, wink deals with the marketing company, say, oh yeah, you scrub the list, right? Sure we do. Well, now the prevailing trend, and I've talked to the defense attorneys, some of the biggest, in fact, I was named in one of the biggest defense attorneys' blogs recently as one of their top stories because I'm one of the biggest thorns in their side. They have to have a relatively intimate knowledge and really have their contracts set up in such a fashion as to say, we expressly, prohibit the use of auto dialers calling people without the necessary opt-in and so on and so forth. And if they're not paying enough attention to the marketing company, they're back to being liable again. And that's been kind of the shift. It's gotten away from that, oh no, we're not liable, nudge, nudge, wink, wink defense. Even though the marketing company has run afoul of the law and it may or may not be you better make absolutely certain that you're doing business with a reputable company who can verify that they purchase the do not call registry and scrub it every month, and so on. I know that there are companies out there who swear. I literally am dealing with one right now on a solar panel calls, a couple of solar panel calls, that the guy's like, oh yeah, no, that's not me, it's a warranty company. And then he went and talked to his lawyer and came back, and now he's settling with it because he found out better.
I got you. Okay. All right. So basically what I hear you saying is that there are degrees of safe in how you can contact people, but the absolute only truly safe method is to call people directly that have published their number out there, say Zillow, Craigslist, or text them directly from your phone, one text at a time, not using any kind of really mechanical device to do that. And
correct.
Those things should be safe.
That's correct. That would be the safest thing.
Right.
And even again, aside from the fact that it's an annoyance, and I tend to think of it in terms of, everybody all day, every day, bitches and complains about robocalls. It's all over social media. It's all over television. There's apps that have been developed for it. If you know that everybody's annoyed with them, maybe it's time to rethink how you're doing your marketing.
Right.
What you do get out of it in terms of reach and casting a very broad net, as you mentioned earlier,
Right.
it may not be worth it financially in the long run.
Well, I mean, not only that, but you don't want to be known as the guy who sends out a million spam calls every day in your
That's
area.
exactly correct.
If you're working a local market.
I had a woman in our private social media group who basically she told me, she said, look, you're not going to like this. I was referred to the group by a member, just like you were. And she told me about it. I get 50 million, robocalls every month, and I'm sick of it too. But I sell solar panels. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're not coming in. And she's like, wait, let me explain to you. I don't do that. I've never done it. And she said, the biggest objection that we face, they go and knock on doors. They'll just pick a neighborhood and canvas.
Right.
And she said the first 10 minutes of every conversation we have is about robocalls.
Right.
We don't make them, but everybody complains to them about them. And as you said, going to the foreclosures and maybe the distressed properties and so on. I see another one. That's another one I didn't mention earlier. People that have citations from the city. Those are lists that are published. Their grass is too long, or their trash is piled up, or whatever. Those are people that if you go and you talk to them and you're trying to make that personal relationship work, if you're the robocall guy, that's just not going to work.
Right. I agree. I totally agree. Well, Doc, I mean, this has been, fascinating as far as, how all this stuff works, really. Did you have anything else that you want to share with us? I really want to get your advice as targeted to real estate investors, what they need to stop doing, what they should be doing, other than what we've just talked about already.
We've pretty much covered it. I mean, it's automation has a dark side, and that dark side can be the expense that comes from litigation, being on the bad end of a lawsuit. And even if you're, not entirely guilty, it can still be so expensive that it's not going to be worth the risk. There's a legitimate way to make the calls, make certain that you're up to speed, what the laws are, that you're compliant. There are companies out there, there are websites out there that will help you become compliant in your call campaigns, in your advertising campaigns. They will build opt-in forms for you that are 100% compliant and guaranteed. And if for some reason something were to go awry, they would then assume the liability rather than you would. Once people go, that far, they're going to go a long way toward protecting themselves and their businesses.
Okay, great. I'd like to get a list of some of those that you recommend so we can put those in the show notes.
I'm actually, it's kind of funny. I've been blacklisted, needless to say, by a lot of robocallers. So, I don't get, my phone hasn't rung while we've been talking, which is kind of unusual. I'll bet you during the span of this 30 minutes or so that we've been talking, there's probably been a number of watchers or viewers or listeners that have probably gotten a few robocalls and been interrupted. I don't get them anymore because I make them pay. That's one of the upsides. I would encourage people, one of the best ways to learn about it, the kit that I sell. If you're like most people and you use your phone for business, how many calls have been interrupted? How many people simply don't answer their phone?
Right.
And because it's an unknown number and I'm just not, it's probably a robocall, it's an auto warranty call or whatever.
Right.
Get the kit. You're going to learn so much, and then you'll fully understand the laws and appreciate what it is that we're doing kind of as a movement with this thing. And come join us in the social media group. You'll understand what I'm talking about. I've got a pretty rabid follower base in that group that they don't mess around. They'll eviscerate somebody for running afoul of the law.
Well, I know that's what I said when we opened. That's how I heard about you, and I'm really excited to get in there. We're going to have a link to your kit in the show notes as well, so anybody can take a look at that. I mean, it's $47, and I know one of my students, Jerry, actually. He talks about it all the time. He's always bragging about his checks, his $1,500 check, his $3,000 check. So he's doing real well with it and speaks real highly of it. So we're looking forward to that. Hey man, listen, thanks so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. And anybody that follows follows us knows we want to do things on the up and up. We don't want to be violating the law. We don't want to be harassing people, on the do not call list and that sort of thing. So we really appreciate you sharing with us today, Doc.
Well, to your credit, and hopefully to all of your viewers and listeners' credit, it speaks to your integrity, and I'm glad that you accepted, the opportunity to talk about this and put it out there, put the good information out there. As I said before, most of this people don't know, and people don't know education is cool. We'll give it to them.
Right.
People who do know and violate the law anyway, no mercy.
Oh yeah, they're going to get a letter, aren't they?
Oh, they're going to get a letter or a subpoena or who knows what.
All right, great. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, Sub-Tours, that's it for this edition of the Sub-2 Deal Show podcast. You can find the show notes for this episode along with a complete transcript at sub2podcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review at Apple Podcast. It only takes a minute and it helps others discover the show. You can subscribe as well as leave a rating and review by visiting Apple Podcast and just do a quick search for the Sub-2 Deal Show. Until next time, keep learning, keep talking to sellers, don't robocall, and you will buy some houses.